every Jewish believer you met was a big deal because it was rare. And we shared something in common. The experience of being a Jewish believer where your friends and your family thought you converted. Because you can say, well, I'm Messianic. We didn't call ourselves that then. We were Hebrew Christians. Or Jewish. Actually, we evolved from Hebrew, because we didn't call ourselves Hebrews. Who calls himself a Hebrew? You call yourself a Jewish Christian. And then we started using the terminology Messianic. Really, the MJA did it in 1975. But it didn't really come into its own until a little bit later. But when it did, and we called ourselves Messianic congregations, you have to understand the only people that called themselves Messianic at that time were Jewish believers in Yeshua. It wasn't just the Messianic movement. It was the Messianic Jewish movement. The only non-Jews we really had were basically people who were married to Jews and a few people I would call lovers of Zion. They just wanted to be with us. They weren't saying they were Messianic. They just wanted to hang out with us. And you know, we didn't have a problem with them hanging out with us. It was a good thing. And the identity, the term Messianic, was unambiguous. It really just referred to Jewish believers in Yeshua. And then over time, we had some bad press from the anti-missionaries who called Messianic a ploy. You know, like nobody could see through it. We were saying Messiah, you know, how much more do you want? Yeshua HaMashiach is Jesus Christ. Like we weren't telling them that. You had other groups around that were an alternative to this. You had your Jews in the churches, you had your Jews in the Messianic congregations, and then you had Jews for Jesus, who at the time, early on, were really cool. They had these denim jackets, and they were embroidered on the back. They said, Jews for Jesus. You know, most Jewish believers wore Jews for Jesus pins and T-shirts because it was a sign of our allegiance to Yeshua and still were Jewish. And it was a good thing. It became a bad thing later as they made being offensive a cornerstone of their approach. They also, we felt they're the dedicated ones because they're out there. They're passing out all this stuff, and they really stood for something, for sharing Yeshua. But they also, eventually, as there became a concerted effort in the Jewish community to combat Jews for Jesus, it became like a dirty word. And so a lot of us started to disassociate ourselves from them because for Jews for Jesus, their identity was simply a way to draw people into an opportunity to share the gospel with them. Nothing wrong with that. We're into sharing about Yeshua. But in the way they did it, it was just window dressing. There was no substance of Jewishness there. The only claim to Jewishness they had was genetic and nothing more. How did I know this? Because they were my friends. We go out to eat. They would order shrimp. They would order lobster. I was eating with Moish Rosen once, and he ordered squid. He goes, no, I know you won't eat that. I said, yep, won't eat it. So he ordered me a burger, which was probably the best thing I could have had there under the circumstances. But the fact is, in the early days, we were together. As they began to face more and more rejection. And we had to do apologizing. We had to say, if we are, the first thing people would say is, oh, you're Jews for Jesus. We'd say, no, 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 we're not. We're Jewish believers in Yeshua, but Jews for Jesus is a mission organization. They seem vast, but the organization never had more than 150 total employees. So they're not vast. And we didn't want that on us because it was like a negative stereotype being put on us. So we called ourselves Messianic Jews. And until 1989, The only people that called themselves Messianic Jews were Jewish believers worshiping in Messianic Jewish congregations. It was very specific. It changed in 1989. Who knows what happened in 1989? Israel put down the Beresford decision. The Beresford decision was done by the Supreme Court of Israel, debating on whether or not a Jewish believer in Yeshua who lived a Jewish life according to Torah could be considered a Jew in Israel. And they said no. And the reason they said no is they dug up this stuff. Shirley Beresford went to a church at one time, or she visited one once, or they pulled up all this stuff and they said no. At that point, the term Messianic Jew, which was user-specific, became like a flag, like a rallying point. And all of a sudden, every Jew who believed in Yeshua, whether they were in a Messianic congregation or a church, became a Messianic Jew. They used to be Hebrew Christians. They were in a Baptist church or a Pentecostal church, but now they're Jewish. Now they're Messianic Jews. So the term became confused. And then later on, after that, the congregations, more and more congregations were planted. There were maybe 50 to 100 at that time, in the early 90s. I had written a book in the late 80s on Messianic Judaism, on factors that indicated growth. And one of them was music. The other one, another factor was liturgy, but the music was like the main thing. The Messianic congregations were originally started to be like a safe haven for Jewish believers and their families. Let me explain. Before I graduated from seminary, I was debating whether I should go into the church. I could, do you realize what I could do very well as a pastor of a Baptist church? They would love to have a Jewish believer as their pastor. You could go far with that, especially with a degree. You know, you could do a lot. You'd be in demand, at least until I passed them on the highway. Then they saw my driving. That would be the end of it. But you know, I realized my wife was pregnant with my daughter at the time, and I realized something. If I was going to a church, my daughter would grow up learning about the Jews. And I didn't want my daughter growing up to learn about the Jews. I wanted my daughter to grow up to be a Jew. And that wasn't going to happen in a church. Yeah, you could say, well, the DNA is there. It's not about DNA, not just DNA. It's about the way you're raised, about your lifestyle, about the way you worship, about your heritage. In a Baptist church, she'd learn about the Jews, but she would never experience being a Jew. In a Baptist church, she'd have people coming up to her and telling her Jewish jokes and having her father curse them out under his breath. Because that's not what the gospel's about. I didn't embrace Yeshua to hear some jerk tell me some joke that he thinks is real funny. You know, oh, we should make the Jew the treasurer. After all, they're good with money. You know, that's not funny. Also, not necessarily true. I didn't want my daughter hearing comments from old Christians saying things like, there's not a Jew alive that I would trust with the gospel. I didn't want my daughter to hear that. That's not why I accepted Yeshua. And that had nothing to do with the gospel. According to Scripture, that's sin. There were some very good people that I cared a lot about and loved very much. But I could never be who I was, and I could never pass on who I was to my children in a church.